We've seen study after study after study after study of every organization that transitions to a 4-day week is more productive and has happier employees. And yet we seem to be resisting this thing that has implicitly already happened.
What are the moments that are really important, like learning and development, like mentoring? What is the office really good for that does that better than working from home?
What I see around the most successful workplaces at the moment, they're recognising that hybrid work is the future. They're moving on from the conversation about where we work and putting all their energy into how we get it right.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Common Factor series, Exploring the Future of Work. I'm Madeline Palmer, Editor-in-Chief at Factor, and I'll be your host for today. We're thrilled to have such an exciting lineup of thought leaders, innovators, and change makers to discuss what lies ahead for how, where, and why we work. The topic of future of work has never been more crucial. The pandemic forced a global reckoning with traditional workplace norms and organisations having to rethink everything, from hybrid models to employee well-being, and even the role of technology in shaping our future workplaces. Today's session will delve deep into these changes, the opportunities they bring, and the challenges they pose. So joining me today is Stuart Munro, a Director and Change Management Leader with over 14 years of experience in helping organisations reimagine their workplaces through people-centric approaches and cutting-edge technology. Welcome, Stuart. We also have Belinda Morgan, a flexible work advisor and leadership trainer for work empowering organisations to transform flexible working into a competitive advantage. She's also the author of Solving the Part-Time Puzzle. Welcome, Belinda. We also have Mark Pesce. Welcome, Mark. He's a futurist, author and co-founder of Wisely AI, whose work explores how technology from AI to VR will shape the next era of work. And Nina, lucky last, who is a workplace strategy and change specialist with expertise in designing high-performing hybrid workplaces and shaping maximum productivity and engagement. So welcome to all of you. It's great to have you all here. Thank you so much for being here today. I want to delve straight into it and ask you all the same question and just talk about what the future of work means to you. I might start with you, Nina. What does that term mean to you?
To me, the future of work is a catch-all for what's coming and help me understand how I can not be surprised again. And it's going to be very much about how we work, live, what do our workplaces look like, and what do we need to know that's coming down the line, really. I think it's everything. The future of work means something different to each person that you talk to.
100%. Mark, we've spoken before about what the impact the pandemic had as well on workplaces. When you think about the term future of work, what comes to mind?
So if we take our minds back to that day, the 25th of March 2020, when we all got sent home, we thought everything was going to just go crash because there was no way we could keep things running. And then we basically did it without missing much of a beat. Yeah, we were all sick of the Zoom calls, but it all just went on. And it revealed that, in fact, our organizations and us and our technology had enormous resources for transformation that we didn't need until we needed it, and we'd reached for it, and it was there. And that bell can't be unrung. Where we go now in the future of work is what do we make of what we learned in that moment?
100%. I'm looking forward to also delving into that in this conversation as well. And Belinda, what does the future of work mean to you when you talk about the future? What does a workplace look like in the future for you?
I think, extending on what Mark said, it's around realising that we don't need to be tied to these rigid one-size-fits-all work models anymore. And it's moving towards more flexible, adaptive workplaces that focus not just on what's most productive, but also what is most inclusive. Just thinking about it work quite differently.
And I love that you mentioned inclusivity as well. I think that's something we'll delve into throughout the conversation today. And Stuart, lastly, what does future of work mean to you?
For me, the future of work is a really integral component of all of our lives, because the future of work really is describing how organisations are going to come together and be successful. And work is such a big part of all of our lives that we kind of owe it to ourselves to be really intentional around how we work, and for organisations to do some figuring out. So for me, it's a really important thing for us to examine and to solve.
So many facets of this topic as well. We were just saying that before the conversation began. But Mark, I want to turn back to you, and you've mentioned that Australians have already backed into kind of a 4-day work week. What do you think is driving this change? Is it the pandemic?
Well, it was in train for a while. We go back 40 years, so 1984. The work week was 40 hours, ABS statistics, all right? In 2019, it had already fallen to 34, and then post-pandemic, it's fallen to 33. So we actually kind of got this, although no one wants to talk about it, what's effectively a 4-day week, because we had a whole bunch of digitization backing up that transition. So the productivity stayed level, but people are working less. And so we don't want to grasp the nettle of saying, well, actually, this is a 4-day week, although we see study after study after study after study of every organization that transitions to a 4-day week is more productive and has happier employees. And yet we seem to be resisting this thing that has implicitly already happened. So we're kind of tiptoeing around a chance to actually be conscious about how we want work to be.
It's a super interesting idea, and I think we're seeing the emergence of it a lot more in Australia as well, among other countries. But you predict that within 20 years, most Australians will transition to maybe even the 3-day work week. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and why you think 3 days.
So really the core is 20 hours. And for some people, it will be 3 days. For some people, it will be spread out differently. And it will depend. And it will also depend on the role the person is filling at that period of time. But I think what we're seeing, and this is the pandemic-induced transition, it forced us all to think much more holistically about the balance between work and life, because we couldn't separate them anymore. We weren't operating in separate physical spheres. And as soon as we fused those elements back together, they started to make new things happen for us. And part of what's happening here is we're now reworking the work-life balance, and life has an upper hand, and particularly around the idea of a care culture. So we're now heading into a civilization that is both much older, and also we want to be able to have people having more children on a higher birth rate. Well, the only way we can do that is by having the pressure toward more care. So we're going to figure out how to make that 20 hours work so that we can all, men and women, and we need to be very clear about that because right now it lands mostly on women, have that more care time in their work. So the thing we have to land here is a 20-hour work week is not slacking off. All right?
It's being very productive within those 20 hours.
But it's also being very productive in the other hours that got freed up. It's not about leisure time. It's about providing a more holistic idea of what we do as people.
Yeah, I love that idea, and I'm looking forward to seeing what businesses do with that as well. And look, we're talking about hybrid work. We've mentioned flexible work as well. How does this impact the career development of the younger generation? I might start with you, Stu. What do you think hybrid, do you think it's having a positive impact on the younger generation? Is it having a negative impact? And how should we balance this?
So I think my first comment is we should always be careful about generalising generational issues because people have different circumstances, and whether you're a younger or older generation, there are different challenges in relation to how we work. But definitely the evidence that we get from speaking to organisations that have a younger demographic within their business is that when there is a more diverse and a flexible approach to work, where we can sometimes lose out is the ability to develop and build capabilities with the younger generation. And so organisations are talking about their speed to capability. So when they bring young people into the business, how long does it actually take to get them to a certain level of benchmark? And there's definitely really anecdotal evidence coming from a lot of businesses like law firms, for example, that have really clear benchmarks around graduates and their level of and speed to capability. And unfortunately, those seem to be suffering post-pandemic. And the way that our younger generation can develop is by being around others and hearing, learning by osmosis. And one of the challenges we need to address in our way of working is how do we still offer that to them? The other part to this is that when you're younger, this is a bit of a generalisation, but you could be living in share houses or certain circumstances where home may not necessarily be the most productive place. It's okay for the senior partner at a law firm who has the beach house and plenty of room and a private office, but not everyone has those same amenities at home. So this is where we sort of grapple with some of the challenges with the new way of working.
It's such a fantastic point as well around whether we have suitable environments at home to work from home as well. And Belinda, we were talking earlier about how the younger generation is growing up with a flexible work environment and expecting that. But again, how do you balance that with the idea of hoping that they get mentors and they get to be able to be mentored in person? And where does that balance come from, do you think?
So I talk a lot about intentional design when it comes to hybrid working, and there is, many challenges that we're coming up with, and one of them is how do we mentor and provide development, not just for, younger people newer to the workforce, but people who are new to your organisation. And it's just about thinking more consciously, how do we do this well? So one example might be if in the past you went to a meeting with your senior manager and then you debriefed walking down the corridor. You're doing that meeting virtual, you just book in some debrief time afterwards. It can be quite simple changes, or it might just be around this person's manager and their team when they're new to the organisation. People need to be in with them for a certain period of time until they're onboarded. So there's solutions to everything. We just need to think a little bit harder about what they might be.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of my friends' workplaces where they've actually got treadmills so they can do walking meetings as well. So there's so many creative options that we've got available to us. But I want to turn to you, Nina, and just hear your thoughts on how we balance, allowing our younger generation to still get that career development, but still work in a flexible and hybrid environment as well.
For me, it really, similar to what Belinda's saying, and I think it's a really important point that Stuart's making, that we can't generalise because there's so much nuance, there's so much difference across people's experiences. And at the same time, there's one central thing that is really important, and that's the strategy and the future direction of the organisation. And if we're bringing on board understanding, input, data around this is where we're going as our future direction, this is who we are as a business and how we do things, then I think we need to look at things like moments that matter and say, what are the moments that are really important, like learning and development, like mentoring? What is the office really good for that does that better than working from home? Yep. What does it uniquely do? And that's really key to then designing this winning formula that ends up creating productivity, creating engagement, making flexibility a strategic advantage. And there's a huge difference between the businesses that do that well and the ones that do it poorly. And what I think is that people who are Gen Z, who are coming into the workforce, they are more savvy, I would say, at sussing the workplaces that are quite good at this and the ones that are not. Their detector, so you know the one that I mean, is quite finely tuned, and they're really looking for employers that are actually not just talking, but are really walking the talk and have this capability embedded there, and that becomes even more important.
What do you think are the biggest barriers for organisations facing implementing these flexible work strategies, just from your perspective?
So related to that, I think the biggest barrier, I've thought about this a lot. So there are key elements that need to be in place. There are key pieces that build organisational capability, and I've written about that. But the thing I think that I notice that stops organisations from really being successful is actually whether they have good information flow coming back to that decision-making team, and whether their listening capability, whatever that looks like in their organisation, is really good and well developed and finely tuned, or whether they are ineffective at that or undeveloped at that. And what happens when they're ineffective at it is that you get decision makers doing the ivory tower thing and just not really actually knowing the nuance of people's experience. And if you went to a foreign country and you didn't speak the language, you would quickly know, you get instant and immediate feedback whether your language is effective, whether it's working. But in organisations, because we've got power dynamics, we've got distance, we're not necessarily in the same room all the time and seeing the kind of nuanced things like body language, we're not getting a lot of signals around what is flex. What is the actual workplace experience of flex or hybrid work or future work, new ways of working? So that's meaning that decisions are being made poorly, and I think that is the key barrier. Is actually, do we see flex like a language? It's something more complicated that needs to be learned. And the organisations that have done this well, there's many case studies of ones that have landed it really well. They have approached it like this is like learning a language. This is more than a mandate around return to the office or a little bit of training for managers or a new policy and a new set of guidelines.
I really do love that language metaphor. I think it's a really great way of thinking about it. I could see Mark nodding away. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mark, on what are some of the barriers you think organisations are facing when implementing, oh no, head in hand, implementing a flexible workplace.
We're in what looks like a really weird war between work from anywhere and return to office mandates. And return to office mandates, if I may be blunt, tend to be one of two things. They either tend to be very insecure leadership who basically will not believe work is being done unless they are staring down at people while work is being done, or it's a stealth form of retrenchment, because the costs associated with RTO for the employee are high enough that suddenly they say, I need another position, so you can get a 10 or 15% reduction in workforce. And we've seen this happening at scale now. And we also know, because Harvard Business Review did a big report on it, that firms that have RTO mandates generally have a down quarter, like almost immediately. So it's a signifier to the market as well. So we have to put all of that into context. And remember then that flexibility is a sign of a thriving organization, and that rigidity is a sign of an organization that needs to have a deep examination of its leadership and its value strategy. Mm-hmm.
I think also flexible workplaces indicate trust in their employees, doesn't it? So fantastic point there. And look, Belinda, I'll turn to you, and I'd love to talk around what a successful flexible workplace actually looks like from your perspective, and how does this contribute to gender equity in the workplace as well?
Yeah, great question. And what I see around the most successful workplaces at the moment, they're recognising that hybrid work is the future. They're moving on from the conversation about where we work and putting all their energy into how we get it right. So they're doing that practically by bringing teams of people together that cut across HR, IT, facilities, and giving them the mandate to actually design the future of work. So Atlassian's a really good example, leading the way on this front. They've got Team Anywhere, they're called, and things they practically do. So as everyone probably knows, they're a remote-first organisation. They have offices, but you don't have to come in. But you do have to come in once every 6 months for a few days to spend time with your team. And back to this intentional design, they really intentionally design what they do to maximise collaboration and to maximise relationship building. And what they see is that then increases feelings of connection to team by 27%. Wow. And then that feeling of connection doesn't actually reduce for 4 to 5 months. So really effective. And to the point around gender equity, it's absolutely essential. So an Upwork study recently showed that 63% of executives said that when they put in a return to office mandate, it disproportionately affected the number of resignations by women. So really essential. Yeah.
It's pretty stark, isn't it, when you look at the stats there as well. Now, Stuart, I'd love to talk around the key trends that you've observed in the evolution of the workplace, especially in the last kind of 14 years of your career as a workplace consultant. What have you seen? Obviously, we've spoken about flexible workplace, which is a key trend. Maybe there might be some smaller trends within that topic as well. What have you seen?
Well, in a way, we've come so far, but have moved so little in a way, because 14 years ago, and I remember when I started doing this type of work, we were implementing flexible workplaces at that time and still grappling with the same issues today. And today is different because there is a greater level of complexity and scale around the level of flexibility that we've grown used to. But we kind of say the juice is worth the squeeze, because even though this is hard, it's worth it, because what workers are really being able to leverage out of this is a better work-life balance and better relationships with their families and so on. So I think that the trends that we're seeing are obviously greater levels of flexibility and a need to repurpose the workspace. And organisations, we're lucky in Australia because we tend to be quite progressive here in terms of our ability to experiment and our desire to experiment and find solutions. So what we're seeing in our workplaces is an experimentation of the types of spaces that we put in them, the amount of space that we need. A lot of organisations are grappling with, well, if people can work from anywhere, how much space do we actually need in our office? And looking at different data sets to sort of inform that. We're seeing more technology in our spaces. There's now technology that enables hybrid work much better. You know, teams can schedule what days they go to the office. They can see when others will be in. We can manage our spaces better with technology as well. So all in all, we're seeing an evolution of the work environment. But what's kind of missing is the attitudes towards flexibility in some cases. So some organisations are still caught up in this idea that if, like what you mentioned, if we can't see people, are they really working? And that's not really an issue with the workplace, because you can be in your office and not be working just because you're there. So really we need to separate the issue of productivity in relation to being able to assess our productivity and make sure that our teams are working versus creating work environments that people like coming to.
Yeah, I think it's super important to understand that balance between creating a really great workplace that we can actually go to as well, and a safe space for our employees. But you mentioned technology, and I want to turn to Mark around the idea of emerging technologies. We're seeing obviously the emergence of AI in the last 5 to 10 years, and VR even as well. And where do you think that's having the most impact at the moment, Mark?
The AI revolution is still very new, but I think one of the things that we've learned in sort of the 2 years since we all got ChatGPT is that it's great, but it ain't a magic wand. And so we don't have to worry about suddenly all being put out of work. But what we are seeing is that rote tasks are now being taken up by AI. But even those rote tasks, when you automate them, require what we are now calling a human in the loop. And this phrase we're going to hear a lot over the next couple of years, because a lot of our roles will be managing these highly automated systems, but keeping an eye on them, tending them. So that in some sense, our roles will become much more gardeners, keeping an eye on things, making sure all the pots are stirred, making sure all the bots are doing what they're supposed to, and then dealing with the things where the bots throw up their hands and go, I got nothing. And that will continue to be the case. That's good for us because it means our work gets more interesting. It also, though, does mean that employees are on a continuous learning path, because all of this is in motion right now. All of the capabilities are in motion, and all the skills that we need are a moving target. And so organizations that don't provide that path won't have the success to be able to do this, won't get the productivity increase, and will be lapped by competitors who embrace the flexibility and the capacity to allow their employees to follow them in this path. That's AI. VR is really interesting because the metaverse has been born and died 3 times over my career. And it's kind of back now. We have Apple Vision Pro, we have Meta doing a bunch of things. It's maybe a work environment, but, and we need to be very clear about this, most fully immersive systems make most women sick, and most men over the age of about 30. All right, they're generally designed for very able-bodied 21-year-olds who have much more interesting vestibular systems, as we call it. They don't get motion sick as easily. So some of that technology is not particularly welcoming. Assume that it might get better. But at the core of it isn't really VR. It's the ability to be able to simulate things. Simulation, well, you're like, okay, that's an exciting thing. It comes to VR. Actually, every spreadsheet we've been using for nearly 50 years is a simulation. It's just a financial simulation. What's happening now is those simulations are getting better and more useful. And that ability to be able to simulate paired with AI becomes now a core business skill that you want your employees to master.
I love that you mentioned the simulation piece as well, because we had an episode, we were sitting at this very table talking about the metaverse and applications of the metaverse within our organisations. But I think the key point was the simulation around environments, but also around certain events, so they can replay events in a simulation. It's just a really fascinating area to look at. I want to talk around technology, but also some of the benefits we've seen from technology. I know, Stu, you've worked with a number of companies where you've seen their productivity levels skyrocket just from using a piece of AI, an AI tool or a new emerging technology. What have you seen from your perspective?
Yeah, the things that we've been seeing are more around the work environment, so the technology that's enabling a good experience, because what employees won't do is go to the office and have a really bad experience and want to come back. Because we know that we've gotten pretty good at creating that at home. So a lot of the really innovation that's occurring within our workplaces is really around the enablement of the space and the activities within the space. But a big problem we're also needing to address is, when should I go to the office? Because now, if we're all working far more flexibly and thinking about all of the different things we're managing, coordinating, when I go to the office, I want to be with my team. So some of the technology that's coming out is around this hybrid scheduling. So I can put in my patterns that I typically like to go. I can see when my colleagues like to go, and we can kind of coordinate when our office attendance together. And when we are planning to go, the technology automatically books us a desk together. So we have this great AI or algorithmic approach to technology and filling space. And that's a crucial component, because without that, what you're really doing is turning up at the office and hoping you'll see your teammates there, and it's a bit of a redundant exercise. So.
Sitting there on headphones all day in a virtual meeting.
Yeah, thinking I could have done this at home. Why am I even here?
And we've talked about the spaces of workplaces now and how they've changed as well. And Nina, I want to turn back to you and look at some of the design trends that you're seeing and that you think might dominate the workplaces in the next few years. Yeah. And how should organisations prepare?
Yeah, so I love this, because I think what we don't realise is that space does have a quite profound impact on the way people see themselves in that organisation, their productivity, their mood, their well-being. There's so much that space can create, and like Stuart's point, we're really good at creating a space at home. We can control all the elements to some degree, you know, depending on who you are and what you have at home. But how do we create a space that contributes to that productivity and engagement? It's really interesting at the moment. I think there's three key themes, and the first is around sound. And for, I think, probably the extent of the lifetime that activity-based working, or some people would call it hot desking, because that's how they experience it, that's been becoming more prominent in workplaces for the last 20, 30 years. The sound issue has never been well managed. And we hear from the Leesman Index data, which is the world's best data set on the workplace experience and what's mattering to people, how that relates to their workplace satisfaction, what the elements are that actually influence what they're thinking about their employer. We know that sound is the thing that makes probably the biggest difference to their productivity, their connection with their employer. So why are we just not managing this very well? And I think it's because it can fluctuate. So it's something like flex. We're managing time and space, but now if you also add in sound, the sound is going to be different in a broadly open area to what it is in a little sound booth, to what it is in a meeting room, and then it changes depending on who's there. So it's a harder question, because you have to look at the patterns of movement. You've got to look at what's happening in the space. But there is one thing that organisations can easily do, and that is to create more spaces where people can productively have individual meetings while they're at the office doing the other connection, collaboration, innovation and transformation pieces. And I think that's what we'll see more of. We've seen these big wide open spaces. We've seen that's meant to be productive, that was productive because it effectively saved a lot of floor space. But now we really need to maximise that experience, take a human-centred design approach, and realise that people are not going to come into the office if they're not productive. They want to come into the office, and productivity means more than pumping out widgets. It means connecting with their colleagues. It means feeling part of the organisation. It means not being isolated, and those individual sound booths are really key to that. So I've been surprised at how much we need that, how much we need more of it, but when we do that well, it has a great payoff back to the organisation. The other two things are, I think we'll see more round spaces. Round spaces make people more creative, and there's been some great research come out of Bond University about that. And if we're using the office if we're trying to maximise things like engagement, innovation, transformation, getting people thinking outside the box, literally, round spaces have been proven to do that, to make people more creative. So I think we'll see more of that coming in. And then the other key thing, I think I call it celery. It's like if someone puts celery in your, if you got to school as a kid and you opened your lunchbox and there was celery in there, it was really not that exciting, but your mum knew that it was good for you. And I think in design, we're often caught up by the trends, what other people are doing, but the thing that's actually good for the organisation, it's going to have long-term longevity, have longevity and contribute to productivity and engagement. It's actually taking that human-centred design approach, getting to the heart of what really matters to people, and that's a harder question again. But that's where, in the future of work, and it's really not that hard to see, that organisations that are doing this well are becoming streets ahead of the ones that are not, and that gap is just going to continue to increase. So yeah, it's celery because it's really not that fun. It'd be really nice to just kind of take some recommendations, see what the last client took, just follow the trends and feel like you've got this gorgeous new environment. And those things matter. They really do. Having a gorgeous environment, biophilia plants, the nature experience, that does contribute back to people's well-being and their connection in terms of their pride, and those things really do matter. But there's something more that has to be done, which is actually the thing that's really good for the organisation, which is get in and understand the workplace experience in a much more nuanced way to build what's right for them.
I love that you mentioned sound as well, because I come from a radio background, and
yes.
we are often, if I wanted to get something done, would go and hide in the sound booth, in the
Yes.
studio booth, because it's soundproof, and
Yes.
it's an exact example of me just wanting to kind of get something done and really nail in on a certain project, and I kind of would disappear into one of those sound booths. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. I do want to turn back.
Could I add a couple of things to that? Sorry, just as you were talking, I'm like, there's a few more things that I would add to that equation. The first is we're seeing this flight to quality in terms of the building and the location. And that's really been tested as well, because if you look at Officeworks as an example, their headquarters in Melbourne, they actually moved to above Chadstone Shopping Centre. And so they had a choice. They were already in the suburbs, but they had a choice to either go into the city or stay or do something else. And they decided, well, Chadstone Shopping Centre offers a pretty interesting, it's one of the largest shopping centres in the country, by the way, and to have an office amenity where below you've got shopping, food, dining, transport, everyone gets parking. We're really testing this notion of what is the role of a CBD now, when we can have some of these quality amenities that offer a different value proposition. So there's all of that. And by the way, something like the Metro in Sydney is really interesting too, because North Sydney was becoming a little bit old-fashioned in terms of having your office there, but now you can get to the city within a few minutes and to other parts of Sydney, and it's all connected by Metro. So places like North Sydney are going to get a resurgence because it's more convenient, and convenience is such a huge factor to what we do. The second thing to add, I think, to this recipe of attractive workplaces is this concept of a vibe. And if you look at tech firms, they've always invested in things like workplace experience, food and beverage. Canva have a whole team in their organisation called the Vibe Team, and their role is to create a great workplace culture and they put on, in Sydney, maybe 200 events a month alone. They're doing trivia with teams. They're putting events and activations on, learning, lunch and learns, social activities. They've got bars, cafes, food. And it's one of the only organisations where employees are asking for permanent desks because they're in the office so much. And so this concept of vibe, out of that we're hearing sayings like, let's halve our real estate but double our experience. Because those are the things that are going to make spaces really sticky and attractive for employees.
I love some of those points as well. And I think if you do make the experience fantastic, people are going to want to come into the office. We do have a group of people that can't come in when you've got young kids. So I do want to talk a little bit around, turn back to you, Belinda, is talk a little bit around the gender equity piece, around the flexible work options that organisations can look at, like timeshare, part-time work. Talk me through how you talk to organisations about those options.
Yes, so what we know at the moment is that 30% of women in Australia currently work part-time and 7% of management roles are part-time. So one of the really practical things that organisations can do to both increase representation at senior levels and decrease the gender pay gap is create more part-time and job share roles at senior levels and at all levels, of course. We're doing it a little bit better at other levels, but across whole organisations we could be getting a whole lot better at this. And it benefits women because at the moment, of course, we disproportionately shoulder more of the caring responsibilities at home. But the other thing is there's so many other diverse groups who want or need to work part-time. It doesn't just benefit women. There's a lot of working dads out there who would love to be spending more time on their caring responsibilities at home and feel like there's even more stigma around asking for part-time or job share. There's people who have side hustles, people who are students, people who are on visas, foreign work visas and can only work limited hours. I could go on. There's so many people who want or need to work in different ways. And back to this idea of what does successful, flexible work look like in future, it's about the location flex, and it's absolutely also about the time flex and getting a lot better at that.
And one of the things we're also seeing now, so the average Australian retirement age right now is shockingly at 57. So in fact, what we're actually seeing anecdotally is that people will retire either because they have to or because that was just the thing, and then they'll get very bored after 2 years.
Yep.
And in fact, having more flexible entry points where they can mentor, where they can share their knowledge or learn something new is also going to be very important as that culture of longevity as we start living 80, 90 years old regularly becomes a thing.
Yeah.
Being able to flex up and down at different life stages is, I think, the future. So.
And I think what we do know is, a lot of our retirees do get really bored and they end up wanting to re-enter the workforce in a different sort of role that allows them that flexibility. So, fantastic point. Let's talk around our younger generation again as well, and the Gen Z individuals that are very entrepreneurial as well. They want to control their work-life balance. I'd love if maybe all of you could share one piece of advice for employers looking to engage with the next generation of workers effectively. And what would be your piece of advice? I might start with you, Nina.
So my advice on this might sound like not advice at all, in that the interesting thing is that when we think about engagement, and we know engagement is really what drives business success. We need people to be wanting to do a good job. In knowledge work, it's extremely important. And that's where we get discretionary effort. That's where we get people connected to the mission. We get to take people with us on the bus if they're engaged. And we, for the longest time, have not really known how to define that. And what is this engagement, and how can we? What are the levers? Is it a better experience? Is it a once a week meeting, or is it something else? Is it the relationship with the manager? That's turned out to be huge. But there's 3 key factors that were outlined by a study that Sirota and Klein have documented in their 2014 book, which seems like it's a long time ago. But it was actually really robust in that it covered 13 million people across 850 companies, and they tested it at all levels, across roles, across genders, across age groups. and these factors held out. They were true. So this is I guess my point is that regardless of someone's generation and the different ways, the different narratives that are going on in their head around the workplace and who they are and what matters to them, there are three key things that matter, and that is fairness and equity, their ability to achieve, to set goals and achieve them, whatever that achievement looks like, and their capacity for camaraderie. And we have almost never talked about camaraderie until COVID, until we realised that people were getting disconnected from colleagues, and it was having a significant effect on well-being and productivity and engagement. But this study has shown us that for a really long time. We've known that these three factors matter. So I call that the face of engagement: fairness, achievement, camaraderie equals engagement, and that is critical for really any age, and we've just got to get better at doing that.
Fantastic. Mark, piece of advice?
I love all of that. I'm going to take, I think, one aspect of it, which is if I'm a young person and I know that I can go and work with someone that I see as a rock star, and we can define that as broadly as we like, but if I know I'm going to be able to go into that organization and work with that person and learn from that person, be mentored by that person, then that is a draw card that no one else can compete with. And it beats having the lovely office, and I've been to Canvas offices and they're amazing and there's a vibe, but it's who do I get to learn from at this important part from my career, right? I feel like the organizations that land that right, because the leaders in that organization are making themselves open for that. And again, this comes to this, how do we transition older leadership? How does that become more of a mentoring role? All of these questions that we're still struggling to answer right now land in this, but there's a way to make this such a positive that it brings the best talent in and retains it.
Fantastic. Belinda?
Look, I think we all want these days more flexibility and to be given more trust and more empowerment, but I think sometimes younger generations are doing a better job of being loud about it, and so, which is fabulous. And what they want to see is role models high up in, back to this idea of, who else is in the organisation, role models above, doing this at the highest levels, right up to the CEO. How are they working, and is it how I'd like to see myself working as I progress?
That top-down approach. Yeah. Fantastic. Stu, lucky last.
I know what to add to all of that great advice. I will say that I think the younger generation won't accept being told you can't do something when they know they can. I'll give you an example. Young people are really good at building relationships online. They're digital nomads, they're used to communicating online, they're used to establishing and building relationships. Now, when we say, hey, you really should come to the office because it will help you build relationships, they say, well, we can do that online. So what we really need to get to is that coming together enhances everything we do. And so, yes, you can operate completely autonomously and successfully at home, but coming together really brings you into an organisation and enhances everything that we do. And that's a really key thing. Some of us that have been in the work environment for a bit longer have extra perspectives around why things are important in terms of having face-to-face time. And for the younger generation, they don't necessarily have that same perspective. So we have to be really strategic about how we extract the values out of this process, because what everyone understands is values. The tactics are kind of in the weeds a little bit, and sort of everyone's got their own tactics about how they do things. So for me, when it comes to the younger generation, it's about establishing commonality across values. It's not having old-fashioned views on what you can or can't do, and being open-minded to moving the whole thing forward. And you'll be surprised if you have some really clear objectives around your culture and you ask the younger generation about how we should actually achieve them, you'll probably get some really good answers. So,
I love hearing as well, like saying, let's actually hear from the younger generation. What do they want? I think is a super important point as well. And lastly, we're coming to the end of time, but I want to look at this conversation in 10 years and imagine ourselves, get our crystal balls out. What would it look like if we were having this same conversation? What would be the most surprising development that that has happened in the future of work. Mark, as our futurist, I'm going to turn to you for this question, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's fine. We're not going to take a look at any technology or even any particular practices. I think what we're going to see is we had an easier time with this than we thought, because in fact people already, there's some points in leadership that maybe will get ground down, but in fact people already, and we already know that we have the capability. And so really it's going to be a matter of finding the path for us. And that's what this decade is. And at the end of this decade, we'll be in a completely different place and we'll go, oh yeah, that seemed easy. Probably wasn't, but it might seem that way.
Yeah, looking back on it, I think we'll understand why we did it as well, and we'll see those benefits come to fruition that all of you have mentioned today. I want to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's been a fantastic conversation on the Common Factor series, so thank you so much. And we